Thank you, Terry, for speaking with me today.
Yeah, good. Thank you, April, for inviting me.
I was wondering, as you were in the university system for a long time, and this is your specialty, talking about social constructs. And I was at the university, firstly, actually, as an employee, a computer trainee, and then ditched that and went to do arts, music, and many other arts. And then stuck around and I went and did some science. And I'm just wondering, in our current Western thinking, what's the future for the university system and alternative education?
It's very hard to know what will happen in the next few decades. I mean, obviously, everything's very uncertain with climate change and with the sort of the switch from sort of a representative democratic market-based capitalism into more authoritarian systems to deal with the sort of crisis that we're having, that the rich, the ruling class, the elites, whatever, of a kind of getting the population to go for populist far right leadership, and the leading to authoritarian systems like Putin's in Russia, or Xi Jinping in China, and obviously Trump is moving in that direction. So I mean, in the way you could project what's going on in universities now and say nothing will change, in another sense, that might be completely wrong. So, in terms of projecting what will happen now, I mean, basically, what we're seeing about universities is a neoliberalism and globalization of changed the way governments spend their money, so that they're actually promising to tax less and to spend less money, but in fact they're spending the same amount of the GDP that they used to be. But a lot of it's having to go to mop up the effects of the casualisation of the workforce, insecure employment, the high cost of housing, and so on. All of these things lead to costs for government, especially in terms of social welfare. You know, a lot more people are underemployed. A lot more people are insecure and have various health problems because of that. And consequently, what you can see is that the share of GDP going to sort of social welfare increases, and the share available of the government spending which goes for education, health, and these kind of transport, or these sort of services, housing, and so on, diminishes.
Mm.
And so that's had a huge impact on the university sector, in that the amount of funding per student has gone down. You know, like, and we could talk about that in more detail. But so if you're going to project what would happen in universities in the near future based on that kind of analysis, business as usual. Well, what we just see is an increasing intensification of workloads for staff, and a sort of gradual, diminishing of what universities can actually offer as students, not because they want to do this, but because they haven't got any money, And in the same thing with research, research funding also, of course, is being cut back. In terms of an authoritarian projection, if you're looking at Putin, I mean, obviously, the same thing is going on. Universities become, training factories, but I mean, clearly there's much more political control over what they're teaching than you get in the representative democracies.
Idea and say, what about permaculture as a movement? It's come a long way because we've done a lot of research individually, not as an organization, and not ever anyone really dictating what we needed to know. We've always followed the need, in that each individual experimenter has gone, oh, damn it, I need a better one of these.
Yeah.
And they've also had a passion to say, oh, I am actually interested in that and I'd like to learn more. And they've developed it and shared the knowledge. So, how can we facilitate that or acknowledge that as a useful tool in the movement, in our education, there was a few streams going on where we started to say, well, okay, if you're not in it, you can't win it. So let's jump into the TAFE system and teach permaculture at TAFE, which I did. And I didn't have the same level of passion with each individual student that I would find if you just spoke to the people who practiced it. Is there some way you could build a structure, an alternative education system that somehow funneled the research and grew the knowledge? Or is it
I
always going
think,
to be
yeah,
chaotic?
yeah. The problem that we're up against in terms of those sort of alternatives is that the market economy is really important in terms of people's life options, and
Mm,
and what you get with the sort of government authorized educational systems, whether it's TAFE or universities, is that you get a certificate at the end of that stamp with a government stamp, and it's basically says to any employer, this is reliable. Whereas with something like permaculture, which is a sort of a kind of voluntary organization, networked and not even bureaucratically controlled from the top, like it's like very different. At the end of the day, an employer is going to say, well, yeah, I can't rely on this, and so
mm,
from the point of view of students, it narrows the possible base of students, and it also narrows it, and it reduces the amount they're prepared to pay for that training, like all of that. Like these are intrinsic factors in the way the market economy is working at the moment. You can't really, I mean, I think recognizing the situation you're in is probably the important thing to do, and then say, well, okay, that's the situation I'm in. What can I do in that situation? And
right.
what we've got, I think, is a sort of good working model. Like permaculture has, three canonical textbooks, if you like, and what the PDC is recognised by permaculturists as being training in the knowledge contained in those textbooks, and like that keeps you honest in a way. I mean, that's a sort of baseline. I mean, I'm not saying that's the be all and end all, and you shouldn't do anything else. I mean, I obviously think other texts are useful, and that other and more recent writings on on things related to permaculture are important, and keeping people up to date is important, and all of that. But the advantage of that sort of network system of people who kind of agree to a set of parameters for permaculture training really works as an alternative structure. It doesn't require paid officials. It doesn't require a bureaucratic structure. And it's been functioning quite well because of that. So then we could look at the situation of teachers and students in that situation and say this. I mean, okay, so from the point of view of teachers, I mean, clearly reputation is huge. And what you find in permaculture is that people who have a working agricultural site that they can kind of show as a model of permaculture do well, like the Brookmans or whatever, or yourself, or and David Holmgren, obviously. And these people are doing well because students can come along and say, okay, this is a working model, and not only am I getting this sort of set of ideas and knowledge from these three canonical books, but I'm also getting a look at how a working model fits. And so that's the teachers. Now, so what that means is that there are very few people in Australia, given the overall constraints of the educational system, who are going to be able to market that skill. Like that's
Mm,
that's the situation we've got. We've got a lot more people who would like to do that than can actually make it work financially. I mean, that's a situation with any industry in capitalism at the moment, in that the more that your job allows you creativity, the more that your job allows you to help other people and genuinely look after the planet, the less likely you are to be well paid, because there's dozens of other people wanting to do that, and they end up settling for a job that doesn't have quite as much of that in it as the one that they'd ideally like to do. So they may end up working for a horticultural nursery or something in a suburb, because the chances of teaching permaculture and making a living of that are restricted. I think you have to go, okay, that's where we're at, like that is not, there's not, in a sense, it's not negotiable and it's awful. I mean, if I'm the person who ends up working okay, like my cousin, okay, Penny, she's a brilliant horticulturalist and totally wonderful person and a great teacher and so on. She got work in TAFE teaching horticulture after doing a TAFE horticulture certificate. And she ended up in totally casualised. I mean, she spent her whole life, the last 40 years, teaching in TAFE without getting a permanent position. And it's like, what the, it's just shocking. I mean, and clearly she'd be much happier having classes of enthusiastic, voluntary
Mm.
students learning permaculture. She'd be terrific in that role, but it's not financially viable. I mean, what's financially viable? So that's, you know,
Yeah.
no easy way out of that dilemma.
Mm.
Okay, so let's look at the students. The students are taking a huge gamble. I mean, I suppose partly based on price. I mean, okay, it's permaculture. People will grumble about the price, between $700 and $1,000 for the PDC and so on. But really, in terms of educational institutions at a tertiary level, it's not expensive. So, and people know, in a sense, people know that. So the students are partly people who are making a sensible price choice to take a permaculture PDC for what they want to do with usually basically with horticulture, agriculture, whatever, um, compared to going to a TAFE horticulture degree for 3 years and getting the certificate. But what they're sacrificing through that is that they won't be in a lot of situations they won't be job ready. And
Mm.
I mean, I think. I mean, I also think a lot of people who do permaculture training maybe they have a dream, Their dream is to buy a small property or have a huge backyard garden uh, and do subsistence agriculture. I mean, by that, I mean household provision, food provision. In addition, some of them think that they're going to market that produce or some of the surplus, market the surplus and make a living out of that. Again, I think the economy makes that extremely difficult to manage. And there's obviously a few cases where people make it work, and but by and large, it's very difficult to make that work. If you buy the small property in the country and set up your permaculture farm, you'll be doing a vast amount of work doing household provision for food agriculture, and it cuts into the time you've got available for paid work. And then there are various things you need in your life that require cash income. You can't. Your children's education, I mean, is a heap of that. Even if it's just driving them to school every day, let alone university fees and whatever. People are not being selfish and consumerist when they start worrying about this stuff. It's really understandable. And the other thing that of course happens with a small property in the country is you need to have another job, or at least if you've got a couple, one of them has to have a job in town usually, which means driving into town and back. I mean, it's not very sustainable. It's not the ideal lifestyle for someone who's worried about climate change, and people, it niggles. I really recommend people who want to try out this dream to do it. It's fun, it's exciting, it's creative, it's an interesting life and so on. But I think it puts people who are in your position as permaculture teachers in an awkward situation because in a way, these people come to you as students and they have an ambition to do certain things which you as someone who's seen this all happen before, must know sometimes it's a little bit unrealistic. Is that a fair comment?
I think it is because I think people are still very individualistic. And if you look around and you decide, yeah, I do want to dip my toes in this, I think an eco village is probably the best way because I've lived in a village, right? So the experience of living in the village and walking to greet other people, walking to this, we used to have a corner store, walking to the school, walking across to fetch the horse or whatever from a communal space. We did that, and I feel like that did satisfy a lot of those needs,
Yeah, for sure.
having the communal production and not the individualistic mindset. And yes, of course, some things were like, damn, why is somebody gone and picked all of that, all of those pumpkins when they weren't ready, or something? You've still got all that level of risk, but you've got a much richer life. And it's really difficult to say that the TAFE would churn out the capacity to create something as rich as that. So what happened in our instance is our son went to study design at TAFE, and then he went to study design at university. He came out of that actually not job ready, not knowing how would I now take all of this theory, was wonderful theory and life experience growing up here. How do I actually start to try to implement that for others? Very difficult. It wasn't really, neither of the spaces, the TAFE or the university, made him ready to make changes on the scale that we need to do, the system needing to change. That actually probably is too much for an individual to do, and maybe it needs to be a whole community saying we want that change.
But I think it's a matter of finding the one that suits you, like, so, you could start off with guerrilla gardening, which is a whole lot of people getting a community garden together without the permission of council. Then you could go on to community gardens that are kind of supported by councils, of which there are quite a lot. These are forms of community organisation which work, and I think someone with a permaculture design certificate is very much appreciated in those contexts. I've found
Mm,
that I can
mm,
cite examples of that. And so in a way, as a teacher of permaculture, one of the things that's what you should be saying to your students, you can still live in town where you're close to a job and just get on the tram and go to work, and then in your spare time you're a really active member of the community garden on the weekends, and your knowledge in permaculture is much appreciated. As well as that, there's co-housing. And I mean, I think
mm,
that an ambitious plan for co-housing may fall over, but a group of five, I mean, as housing prices expand to unrealistic levels, a group of, five young people or even three young people who want to buy something together or want to rent and share housing together. This is kind of working. And what these people are doing is some kind of community thing, and that also works in terms of backyard urban food gardening. I mean, like, my daughter's household has got four people in it, and they share the gardening, and it's right, they've got apricots and olives and grapes and a vegetable garden and chooks, like, so they're not doing that badly really in terms of an urban backyard gardening. And yeah, and that's a share household. So that's the most insecure situation you can have with renting, But on the other hand, look what they're doing. It's pretty amazing, really. And so, okay, so you go from that, and then you go to older people who've really got money and want to sort of share, an apartment block where older people are sort of buying apartments near their friends, and again, that's an example of co-housing. So I think it's a matter of finding the sort of the communal niche which
mm.
works for you, and that not expecting everything to work for you. The person who's 55 and grumpy and an individualist doesn't want to go join the guerrilla gardening group, but on the other hand, they might go quite well in an apartment in Carlton or something. So, like, it's like in terms of rural stuff. Okay, so what I'm finding about that is, like, if you talk to anyone about this topic, you'll get this kind of discussion where people say, what we need is to move more into kind of rural communes with people working together, and like, it's financially feasible. It still is in parts of Australia. I mean, unlike most of the rest of the world, you could grow all your household food provision in a 60-hectare block with, five people living together, in an old farmhouse or whatever. I mean, that's all kind of feasible, but it's like there are so many properties like this around Australia, and you cannot get anyone to join together to occupy them.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? You'll find they're either on the market, someone who else who's tried this sort of rural dream has finally dipped out at the age of 45 or 65 or whatever, and this property is available for sale. And the person, like this is another friend of mine, young, like 40, 45-year-old, right? So she's trying to get a group of friends. She really needs 5 people to buy into it. And it's not just a problem of money. I mean, it is partly a problem that they can't contribute a huge amount of money compared to her. But that's not the only problem. The other problem is they're not sure if they'll get on with her, and she's not sure if she'll get on with them. And this person here is not sure if they'll get on with that person. And getting the 5 people together. And instead, what people seem to want to do is to buy their own place. And obviously that reduces its chance of financial viability. But socially, I don't know. And I mean, I think it's part of the way that where the economy works. The economy rewards individual people for employment. You get your
Mm.
pay packet, and then you hang on to that. You don't share that with other people. And in a way, it's not wise to, and it doesn't feel fair to give money to someone else who's made their own choices about employment, not necessarily the same as yours. And it's like, yeah, it's very hard to get that sort of that mindset. You can talk about it as individualism, as though it's a cultural trait, and yeah, sure it is, but it's also fits with the economic structures that we're sort of inevitably involved in.
Mm. So do you feel we're trapped?
We're not exactly trapped. What you need to do is to work out what works for you. And it may be that living as a single isolated person in a 10-acre block near to a country town is your ideal solution, and it's not the sort of co-housing, or it may be that the co-housing with 5 really close friends you've known since high school is really going to work for you, and you do that. Or it may be just that it's a community garden, or it may be just guerrilla gardening, or food not bombs, or something like that. Like it's always difficult, but you've got to kind of be flexible and go, well, what actually works for me, not just what can I
Mm.
dream up.
Mm.
And be
Excellent.
realistic about the economic constraints you're under, you've got to worry about.
Yeah, thanks. Well, maybe that's in a similar way that you need physical models for the care of Earth people, but you also need physical models for the care of people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like the book that I've just currently had published, I mean, there's a whole chapter on the Zapatistas. I think the Zapatistas are fascinating and fantastic,
Okay, so what did the Zapatistas do that
Well,
you
okay,
maybe
so the
one day hope to do?
Zapatistas, yeah, they took over this whole area of Mexico, or a region called Chiapas. Um, and what was the situation prior to the kind of, let's say, call it a revolution, but it's, an insurgency is probably a better term. Prior to their insurgency was that the land, the agricultural land was owned by absentee landlords, and the people who were originally indigenous peasants were forced to work for, massively low wages, and basically was sort of starving and in really bad shape. And they took over and they occupied all that land and distributed it to communities, villages, and that people have their own plots, but also have plots in common. And they have a system of government where people um, elect representatives who go to the next body up. So as say villages elect representatives to a municipal group. Well, now that municipal elected body will come up with ideas for sort of agreements between the villages as to how they're going to do something. And then they try that, then they go back to their villages and see if that's going to work. And then when they have a consensus, then they make that an agreement, right? And then if particular villages start not to do it, then they have to take it back to that central body to
Mm.
renegotiate the compact to something that everyone can actually do and agree to. So that's a sort of an egalitarian political system. And as well as that, I think the other thing that's really interesting about them is that they're doing a lot of non-monetary economy stuff. So a lot of um, for example, the hospital system, which is a public, funded by the villages and so on, rather than giving the money and all that going through money, the villages provide them with supplies they need, like food or medical supplies or whatever it may be, so that the hospital can afford to run. So that's done on a sort of basis of a voluntary agreements to supply particular things to that hospital.
Mm, mm,
Same with the bus service or whatever, and the same with their army. They've got an army, and again, that's funded by people providing the army with the supplies they need rather than being a monetary payment. So
mm,
it's a sort of voluntary gifting economy to some extent, at any rate. Yeah,
mm. Fascinating.
yeah.
Well, thank you, Terry. I've got a lot to think about now. My head is
Okay.
buzzing.